Good morning. This is Haley Solomon with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins-Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far and that you had a nice week last week. We are going to jump right back in and kick it off with some coalition updates. Make sure that you register for our Bringing It Home conference. Registration is now live. So this conference will be taking place this year in June, on June 4th through the 5th at the McKibbin Center in Raleigh. And for the first time since 2019, we will be back in person. So this conference, the Bringing It Home, Ending Homelessness in North Carolina, is a conference that's really dedicated to a lot of learning, networking, and collaborating with industry experts from across North Carolina and beyond, and dedicated to having that conversation, engaging in the issue of homelessness and ensuring that homelessness in North Carolina is rare, brief, and one time only. So our two-day conference will include more than a dozen presentations, panels, and workshops that will cover a broad range of topics that are related to homelessness. And we are doing this conference in collaboration with our friends at the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness. We have an amazing keynote speaker. Her name is Marisol Bello. She is the Executive Director of the Housing Narrative Lab. And also, for the very first time, we are accepting sponsorship for the Bringing It Home conference. So if you are interested in sponsoring the conference or are willing to connect us with someone that you think would be, we'll have our Director of Development's email in that call notes, and you can contact Jessica Griffin at jgriffin@nchousing.org. Also, just want to lift up a few dates for you. In addition to that June 4th through 5th date, make sure that you save May 3rd and May 17th on your calendars. Those will be the last two Learning Collaborative sessions. We'll have more information about those in the coming weeks. And then also mark your calendars for September 5th through the 6th. That will be our North Carolina Affordable Housing Conference that we have in partnership with the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, Centra, and several other awesome partners. Moving on to federal updates. So we have avoided yet another federal government shutdown just hours before the deadline on March 22nd, 2024. So the House and Senate passed the $1.2 trillion six-bill minibus for fiscal year 2024, and the President Biden signed it. Also last week, the President released his fiscal year 2025 budget last week, and we will link that for you in the call notes. We wanted to give you a few updates on the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. We are still keeping an eye on this. It now has 218 co-sponsors in the House, which is a simple majority, and is one of the major goals that coalitions are really trying to get to. It is still evenly split between both parties, which is a good thing, and there are still a number of Democrats who are in the queue waiting for additional Republicans to sign on. Efforts are still being made to meet with as many members as possible to garner support, and to also push additional provisions of the housing credit legislation across the finish line this year. One of the ways that folks are hoping to push some of those provisions across the finish line is through the tax package, Tax and Jobs Package 2024. You'll remember this package passed on January 31st, and it included two key provisions from the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. The first was reinstating the 12.5% expansion of the 9% tax credit retroactively for 2023, as well as 2024 and 2025. And then the second provision was lowering the 50% private activity bond threshold to 30%. The number of vehicles to attach this legislation to is dwindling, so we really want to continue to keep the pressure on our representatives and find any and all opportunities we can to get this piece across the finish line. We have templates on how to communicate with your different members of Congress, both about the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act and about the importance of the tax and jobs legislation piece that includes those provisions in the call notes linked for you. In other national news, a recent settlement with the National Association of Realtors is actually expected to help bring down home prices. We will see. Realtors' commissions are expected to decrease as a result of the ruling, and that is supposed to decrease home prices overall. So for a median price home at about $387,000, this ruling could bring down brokerage fees of about $23,000, to by as much as $6,000 to $12,000. So that shaves that off of the home price. So we'll keep an eye on that and kind of see what the impacts of this ruling are. And we have the link to the settlement details in the call notes for you. This is a pretty big deal, as there were several markets where some of these fees were really cost prohibitive and hindering affordability and access to homeownership. For the first time in 15 years, the Federal Housing Administration is increasing its loan limits in order to expand financing for manufactured homes. On March 18th, the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, announced these new loan limits for its Title I manufactured home loan program. And these increases were made using different methodologies that we have linked in the call notes, but essentially the changes are supposed to better align with current market prices and are expected to incentivize and encourage lenders to offer the program to home buyers who are trying to purchase manufactured homes, as well as the lot on which they sit. And now these loan limits will be recalculated on an annual basis in order so they can attempt to keep pace with price changes over time. Another federal news, HUD, so the Department of Housing and Urban Development, their Office of Public and Indian Housing launched a new source of income protections website. It's actually a really great user-friendly website. It explains what source of income discrimination is, the impact of this form of discrimination, as well as all the forms it may come in. Also, it includes a map of what states and localities have laws or ordinances trying to work against source of income discrimination. In other words, laws or ordinances that are trying to prohibit the discrimination of renters based on where their income comes from. There are also additional resources that were recently updated by the awesome folks at the Poverty and Race Research Action Council on source of income discrimination. So we've linked that too in the call notes, so you can have those two really good resources there for you. Moving on to state updates, the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, NCORE, is asking people to comment on the proposed changes to funding for Hurricane Florence recovery and funding for resiliency against future storms. So these proposed changes are being considered. They're going to impact various aspects of spending on the Homeowner Recovery Program, their Affordable Housing Development Fund, their Homeownership Assistance Program, and their Infrastructure Recovery Program, as well as other different initiatives that they have. Public comments have to be submitted by 5 p.m. on April 15th, 2024 to publiccomments@rebuild.nc.gov, or you can send them by U.S. Postal Services to an address P.O. Box 110465, Durham, North Carolina 27709. We have included a draft of the proposed changes in the call notes, and I'm really happy to mention that these proposed changes, the text, are available in both English and Spanish. On the state legislative side, there are a few relevant General Assembly meetings happening in the next week or so. Today, the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on GenGov will be happening at 1 p.m. You can also watch or listen online. On April 2nd, so that's next Tuesday, there'll be two meetings. The Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Medicaid will be meeting at 1 p.m., and then the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Health and Human Services will be meeting as well. The North Carolina House and Senate are convening again on April 10th, and remember, short session does not formally begin until April 24th, so that is actually not that far away. And make sure to stay tuned for some advocacy opportunities we'll have for you in early May. Moving to local community updates. Overall, I just want to mention that there are some great examples of the framework that we've been talking about for the past several months. So the supply, subsidy, stability, and infrastructure. So there are some really good examples of stability happening across our state, and so I just wanted to list those up. On March 14th, a unanimous decision was made by the Town of Cary Council to approve funding for a program by Stable Homes Cary in partnership with Dorcas Ministries that is going to provide support for community members impacted by large-scale property redevelopment in the town. The council approved a $1.65 million three-year funding plan, starting with $500,000 in year one to assist low-income residents beginning immediately. So these funds can go towards mitigating the impacts of displacement that often happen with large-scale property redevelopment. This is an example of a stability intervention, right? And it's really great to see a local government taking this kind of action. And hopefully over the next few years, there can also be some proactivity in mitigating some displacement as well. Moving to the western part of our state, faith communities joined forces. Recently, the Brevard Transylvania Housing Coalition recently held their first Faith and Housing Social Impact Summit with Reverend Keith Thompson with Brevard First United Methodist Church, and they shared plans to create teacher housing on land that the church owns in Rosman. 3 single-family homes will be rented for $1,000 a month to local teachers, and if a teacher stays for 3 years, they will get 40% of their rent paid back to them to go towards the purchase of their own home. Again, a really creative kind of hybrid, right, between creating supply, but also allowing for there to be subsidy to kind of bridge that access to homeownership in the future. In Winston-Salem, City Council members met recently to learn and discuss their options about creating an affordable housing trust fund. They're considering setting aside $40 million for affordable housing in the city. And although the creation of the fund is still in the works and will still require a vote from the council as well as several other steps internally, several of the members were in agreement about the creation and the necessity of the fund. The city is planning a housing summit for later this spring, so we'll make sure to keep an eye on that. Out of Garner, a Garner mobile home park, the residents reached a settlement with their property owner. The residents of Indian Creek Mobile Home Park in Garner recently reached a $1 million class action settlement with the park's owners after the owners treated residents as purchasers when it came to the repairs needed in the home and tenants when it came to evictions without proper notifications. I'll say that again. When it came to repairs, the owner treated the residents as purchasers, right? Sort of kind of accepting that responsibility. But when it came to evictions, treated them as tenants. So giving evictions without proper notification. This case was filed by the North Carolina Justice Center and the National Consumer Law Council in 2021. And again, it finally reached settlement recently. So congratulations to those residents. And then also to the wonderful folks at the Justice Center and Consumer Law Council. Moving to events, we have several going on. I want to lift up the Women's Affordable Housing Network is having their first National Housing Summit this year in June, from June 9th through the 11th in Atlanta. You can still register. We'll have that link in the call notes. I also want to lift up some webinars coming up that may be of interest to several folks. The Racial Disparities in Tax Subsidies for Home Ownership is being held by the Tax Policy Center next Tuesday from 12 to 1:30 p.m. It is a webinar. There's also a Fair Housing Event Series being hosted by the Gaston Association of Realtors and City of Gastonia on April 11th. There's a webinar on April 17th discussing preserving owner-occupied affordable homes, hosted by the National Council of State Housing Agencies. And our awesome folks at CAHEC will be having their Partners Conference on June 4th and 5th. So we'll be having fun running back and forth between their awesome conference and our conference. But you can check out the registration link in the call notes as well. If you didn't check it out last week in Reports and Resources, the National Low Income Housing Coalition did release their GAP report. You can check out our summary of North Carolina's data and the national findings from the report here, essentially showing that there is a growing and continuously growing need and gap in available housing for extremely low-income renters, not only across the country, but across our very own state. The U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Trade Commission, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and HUD announced a new resource last week that really goes into detail for rental housing applicants and tenants about their rights when it comes to background checks and rental screening. So make sure you check that out. There's also a really interesting piece titled the Racial Wealth Divide in Black Homeownership. Some of the new data is showing some small gains, but it's also really highlighting the fragility of those gains. There are so many other resources I want to lift up for you all. That's what happens when you don't have a call for a week, and there's a lot of great material that comes out. So make sure you check out the call notes when they come out. This call will also be recorded if you want to come back and listen to something. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or you'd like us to talk about something in particular. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next time.